again, right now we're about to see the 1980s over again for these countries. Like the U.S. government is raising the cost of capital. The Fed funds rate is skyrocketing. We're going to have another 50 basis point increase next month probably. It's making all this debt that they have way more expensive. I mean, you can just imagine how insane this is now, that these countries, at least they were bailed out by the fact that there was ZIRP, there was zero interest rate policy. Like at least the cost of borrowing was pretty cheap in the last decade. It's not going to be cheap anymore, right? So you're going to have a list of state failures, right? So that's already started to happen. So we saw Sri Lanka, we saw Iraq. The new meme is people swimming in a swimming pool of the former president, right? Yeah. You're going to see a lot of that this decade. So now the IMF is going to try and step in and try to prevent some of this stuff from happening. So it's got to shift its resources away from Europe, where it was like trying to hold together the EU essentially, and kind of excuse and subsidize the lockdown policies. It's got to now shift back to the third world, and that's what's happening right now. So the IMF has just been in Egypt, making a big deal with the military dictatorship there. The IMF is going to Ghana, and the Ghanaian currency has, like Ghana is one of these other countries that's had this like super long history with the IMF. They've been bailed out a million times. Should have been they should have just been bankrupt and restarted, and instead they've been like zombie, they've been like kept alive like a zombie essentially. And the Ghanaian currency, the CD, is like the worst performing currency in the world this year. And I think it's an interesting, I'll probably end my essay with thinking about like the dichotomy between the IMF visit to Ghana, which just happened a few weeks ago, where these people are going to come in with reckless abandon and totally crush the lives of all these people just so that economy can squeeze out more hard currency to pay its debts. And the contrast couldn't be greater with the Africa Bitcoin conference that my organization is really delighted to sponsor, where we're going to be coming in and showing people how to escape from the system through Bitcoin. I think that's pretty fucking cool. Yeah. So, basically, that's kind of where we're at is the IMF and World Bank are going to get a lot more relevant in the developing world again. And I hope we can create a dialogue around that. What really got me thinking was I was, considering, okay, so we talk about how Mao and Stalin probably killed 100 million people, right? Like in the 20th century. These are rough estimates, but most of them didn't die by the sword or the gun. Most of them died because of disastrous agricultural policy, right? You had people who didn't know how to farm being moved to farms, and then they starved to death, things like that. You had, like people dependent on imports of a particular food stuff, and then that just like disappeared and they all starved. Like, so it was usually like agricultural related. So no one's ever done an accounting of how many deaths World Bank and IMF structural adjustment policies inflicted on the developing world, and especially in the 70s and 80s, but like, just generally speaking. But you can do the math. So again, studies show that for every 2% decline in GDP, mortality rate increases by 1%, or rather deteriorates by 1%. So if you think about how structural adjustment and austerity policies imposed by the bank and the fund caused massive contractions in GDP for some of these countries over the years, we're talking millions and millions of deaths. Maybe tens of millions of deaths. It can probably be calculated, and someone should do it. And you know what? There's never going to be any justice. No one's going to go to prison. It's all in the past. Okay. But we can at least talk about it and acknowledge it, and I think that's important. I was talking the other day with a woman from Indonesia, and I do want to mention this case because it's so powerful. And she works for a nonprofit that works in this place called West Papua. Maybe Danny, you can bring up like a map of West Papua. It's a PAPUA, and we can just kind of locate it for Peter. But basically, like, I talked to her about I'm digging into the World Bank and IMF's role in repression in her country. So you can see this is a map. If you just zoom out a little bit, so you can see Indonesia. Yeah. So Papua and West Papua constitute the western half of the island of New Guinea. Mm-hmm. So New Guinea is this incredible treasure. It's so rich in every possible natural resource. It has the richest coral seas. It's like a gem on the planet, right?
It's got such a dense forest that parts of it are still unmapped.
It has wild. The third largest rainforest in the world after the Amazon and the Congo. And if you just for a second, like, so the eastern half is its own sovereign nation, Papua New Guinea, which was at one time an Australian colony. The western half has been under military occupation by the Indonesians ever since Indonesia became independent from the Dutch. In '69, there was something called the Act of Free Choice. So basically, in the western half of the island, you have like hundreds of indigenous tribes that have nothing to do with Indonesia. Is really that island on the left. Java is where like most people live. This enormous island over on the left under Sumatra. That's where like 100 million people out of the Indonesian population live. And the Javanese basically colonized all these small islands. The people who live in West Papua are totally different ethnicity, different religions, like everything. They're just different. So you have these people there, and they've been relentlessly persecuted. So by Dutch colonialism, and then in '69, the Indonesian military did like a puppet vote where they like picked 1,000 people in front of soldiers who had guns and made them say whether or not they wanted to be part of Indonesia. And of course, everybody said yes. So it's been, and that was ratified by the UN. So this has been part of Indonesia since then. And it's like, honestly, probably one of the world's like most repressive police states in the entire planet. There's no free press. Journalists aren't allowed to come in. The military has free reign to kill people. It does it all the time. It's actually really crazy, and very few people know about West Papua. And it reminds me of It literally reminds me of Pandora from Avatar, from the movie. I mean, it's just this incredibly rich place. So in Papua, you have the world's largest gold mine. It's called Freeport, and it's so devastating. I mean, it's the largest gold mine in the world, and I'm going to give you some numbers. So that's the largest gold mine in the world. It's called the Grasberg mine, operated by Freeport. It's next to a mountain called Puncak Jaya, which is a 4,800 meter peak. It's the tallest peak in the whole region. And I'll just give you some data that's I think going to shock you on this.
It's called Freeport.
Yeah. So check this out. So by the time this mine will be depleted, it will have generated 6 billion tons of waste, more than twice as much rock as was excavated to dig the Panama Canal. Now, this mine was, until recently, 90% controlled by this like Phoenix-based, Arizona-based company, Freeport. And the rest was given to the Indonesian government. This company is the largest foreign taxpayer in Indonesia, and the local people get literally nothing. The ecosystems downstream from the mine have been devastated. More than 1 billion tons of waste have been dumped directly into a jungle river of what had been one of the world's last untouched landscapes. More than 200,000 tons of toxic tailings, like basically waste material from mining gold and copper, are dumped every day into a World Heritage site. And basically, like, this is part of the kind of bank fund plan. This is like a visual, vivid description of kind of the goal of what they do. Is they build infrastructure. This is from the World Bank's own words. They say international business interests want better infrastructure in order to extract and export the non-renewable mineral and forest assets. So this is the kind of project that would be, related to what we're talking about here. And
but Bitcoin mining bad.
Yeah, Bitcoin mining is bad. Yeah,
bad. But the crazy part is, for these people, they were subject to the world's largest human experiment. So if you go back to the map of Indonesia, Danny, so again, like for a long, long time, the officials in Java have said, there's too many people here. We need to move them around. So this was called transmigration. And the World Bank actually gave like $500 million in the 1980s directly to support this. And what this meant was like people were moved from Java to places like Papua. And it was like settler colonialism. Like basically the local people who lived there were like pushed aside. All of their shit was like burned down. And like these new settlers were there to like grow export crops for the Indonesian government. And this has been happening to the extent where in Papua, like the ethnic Papuans, let's say, used to be 90% of the population, and today they're less than 30% of the population. So it's like cultural genocide that's happening there, and the bank funded it. It's insane. And again, they've never paid a price. I'll talk about this in my essay, but there was a loan not that long ago, in 2001, a huge loan that the banks financed for roads and infrastructure in Papua and a few of the other islands in eastern Indonesia. And again, it's very clear that this project was not to help the local population, but instead to build better roads so that bigger trucks could come in and extract more stuff from this place. Again, one of the world's like last remaining untouched landscapes. And this just shows you like really what the bank and fund are all about. They could care less about human rights or the indigenous people or any of this stuff. It's all like, and again, the people who work at the World Bank probably don't even know what we're talking about. I mean, it's so buried under paperwork. The amount of reports that these institutions create are legion. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of pages of stuff. Of course, the human experience has been completely stripped out of them. They use jargon and all kinds of different, euphemisms. We talk about, I mean, the structural adjustment, you would look at it and say, oh, that sounds fine. Like it hides the enormous human toll of what has happened.
But what can we do? And it's a big question, but
it's a huge question.
But when you talk about shrimp, I had a bloody shrimp sandwich yesterday at lunch. Like, I don't want to be.
So we start with knowledge, right? So I think the most important thing is for people to learn about the bank and the fund, and to like start to at least memorialize in their mind, and we create a collective legacy of like what they've done, and we try to think about how we can avoid doing that in the future. Now, I've talked to a few people about this in terms of like, because I don't think there's not going to be justice. This is all done. Everything the bank and fund has done in terms of like, again, squeezing value out of poor countries to benefit rich countries is forever encrusted in our societies. Like when you walk around London or Amsterdam or Berlin or New York, like, yes, a lot of the success of what we've done in Western civilization or Tokyo is freedom, is free speech, property rights, press freedom, the stuff that I fight for all the time, like is democracy. These things have given us enormous fruits. What we don't think about is that the other half of the equation has been stealing stuff from poor countries, and that's not acknowledged, and we don't talk about that. And it's part of the picture. So both have been necessary to create the success of the West. So when we talk about a future that's not exploitative, it's difficult to think about because we've never seen anything like that before, right? Now, I talked at length with Jeff Booth and Saifuddin about this. Both of them have very interesting ideas relating to this. But one concept is, if there is a Bitcoin standard, like for now, Bitcoin is just a tool that people can use to escape like bank and fund policy in a way. Like generally speaking, if you didn't have Bitcoin, you would be completely at the mercy of the local currency being collapsed by IMF and fund policy. So at least Bitcoin gives you a little bit of an escape, right? You can borrow from international markets because again, they constrict lending and they basically shrink everything, right? So if you have a world where we no longer on the fiat standard and we're in the Bitcoin standard, then the general operations of the World Bank and the IMF maybe become impossible to run. Like maybe they become more like normal banks that have to take normal risk instead of being able to bail countries out for decades on end as part of this massive debt bubble. So if the debt bubble and the debt party ends, they may have to just be a lot more careful and discriminating about what they fund, or they might just disappear entirely. I mean, as Saifuddin told me, like, today, like if we want to give $30 billion to Brazil for some reason, like as long as the Congress approves of it, we send the money to these, these institutions and they disperse it. It doesn't come from anywhere, right? It's like comes from some paperwork, right? But in a Bitcoin standard, it would be like, yeah, you and whose Bitcoins are going to send 30 billion to Brazil? Yeah. You know what I mean? So like it does sort of, it may change. It's possible.
It reminds me of what you said before about war bonds. The reason war bonds went is because people wouldn't want to fund it.
Yeah, in a Bitcoin standard, it's like going to be a lot more difficult to finance forever wars, and it'll be a lot more difficult to finance the bank and the fund. I also think there's something interesting about maybe a world where everybody's on the same currency, because currently the bank and fund exist to prop up, in many ways, to prop up the dollar system, right? So if you don't have the dollar system anymore, if everybody's using something that no government can manipulate, it's this neutral currency, then I don't think they can nearly have the same power. And I don't think the disparities exist in such a way. Like the Cantillon effect we often talk about, like in our own towns and cities and countries. Usually in the West, we're thinking about Wall Street and stuff, right? But there's also a global Cantillon effect that we've been discussing basically the whole time of the people who create the money see the most value and the people who don't create the money get screwed. The global Cantillon effect is the rich countries and the poor countries. And it's a tale as old as time, right? So if we break the Cantillon effect, I think we may actually see a change. Like not only in the labor share of economies, where you have the people doing the work getting more of the share, which has been completely shriveled by IMF and World Bank policy, but also globally speaking, like these countries with these incredible riches that we've been talking about, both human and natural. And we haven't even gone into Brazil or much of the African continent, but like there's such incredible potential in these places.
Yeah.
And they will be the biggest countries in the world in the future. Nigeria will be the third largest country in the world by 2060. So these places have so much to offer. And I think in a neutral reserve currency, maybe they can reach their potential. But I mean, the main point of today's talk is we should reflect on our history and what we did and what we've done and how
what we're doing
and what we're doing currently. And maybe it can change, maybe it can't. But I mean, this is an important thing for us to reflect on.
Yeah. Wow, a lot to think about there. When people talk about the colonial past of the UK,
it's not an ancient history.
It's not a past. It's
I mean,
a present.
the Indonesian taxpayers still paying off loans from these projects.
Yeah.
And as you saw from that visual in Argentina, the Argentines now have $31 billion that they owe to the IMF. I mean, again, you ever heard of this concept? We can maybe finish out with this. There's this idea of odious debt.
Yeah.
So odious debt was invented by the U.S. government when we liberated Cuba from the Spanish Empire, and the Spanish had been basically subjugating the Cubans. So the Americans said, just like 100 years ago, America said, you Cubans, you don't owe the debt that your occupier incurred. That would be unfair. So we called it odious debt. So the whole point of what we've been discussing today is that, again, the debt takes two. It takes two. It's a dance, right? So the borrower was almost always a dictator or some sort of unaccountable, corrupt leader. And they borrowed that money, sinking their country into misery in a way that was not done with consensus of the people. So the question is, if you live in a country like the DRC, should you be responsible for all the debt incurred by Mobutu? The answer morally is no, absolutely not. The problem is that, again, that debt exists as an asset on a Western bank's balance sheet, and they don't want that to go to zero. So the game must go on,
As Danny was saying.
So the irony is there's only one country in the last 20 years that has actually gotten qualification for odious debt. It was Iraq after America invaded Iraq. So Saddam had all these debts. And we said, now that we had our little colonial possession, we said, no, this doesn't owe those debts anymore.
Was that after they surrounded the Ministry of Oil?
It was around, all that stuff happened at the same time.
Yeah.
The point is that we did it in such a way where it was a one-time exception. But the reality is all these poor countries owe staggering amounts of debt. I mean, again, Argentina, 31 billion. A lot of that was borrowed by military dictators in the 70s and 80s. I mean, the Argentine people should not have to pay that debt. That's insane. They never voted for that, ever. Nope. Okay. So the answer is that a lot of the debt of the world, an overwhelming percentage of what our assets on balance sheets is odious, was created in an unfair contract. And that's got to change. And maybe Bitcoin helps pop that bubble. And I don't think it's going to be pretty. I mean, again, to finish with the heroin addiction comparison, it's true. Like these countries are heroin addicts and they're completely addicted to debt. And the drug dealers have been selling and selling and selling and convincing them that they should just buy more. Don't worry about it. It's going to be very painful, but it's way less painful than being an addict forever. Like you have to go to rehab.